Israelis celebrate their country's 33rd anniversary. There are reasons to celebrate. Born in war, the state has emerged victorious from 4 conflicts. There's a fair measure of prosperity and a high living standard for many of its nearly 4 million people. Now, at 33, Israel faces a landmark election. On June 30th, Israelis go to the polls in the biggest, the most colorful, the sharpest and costliest election campaign since the founding of the state. Seeking another term in office is Prime Minister Menachem Begin. As leader of the right-wing Likud coalition government, he broke the Israeli Labor Party's hold on power in 1977. His 4 years in office have been among the most eventful in his country's turbulent history. He's presided over rampant inflation, the settlement of occupied land, and the historic peace with Egypt. Despite foreign policy successes, the country's battered economy was expected to bring his downfall. Mr. Begin, however, has bounced back. Exploiting all the levers of office, he is now making the running. Latest opinion polls say his Likud party is likely to win the largest number of seats in the new Knesset, the Israeli parliament. The Likud coalition is now predicted to win 45 of the 120 seats. In January, the Likud was expected to win only 20. Supporters of the opposition Labor Party have been stunned by the resurgence of the Likud. In January, Labor was expecting to have an absolute majority. There was confidence they would resume governing the country as they had before being voted out of office in 1977. Labor's support is strong among Jews of European stock, white-collar workers, and the middle-aged and older communities. The party is led by Shimon Peres, an experienced politician and former minister. He began his campaign centering on Israel's economic woes under Begin. The early speeches promised restraint and responsible financial management. The voters have not been wooed by Labor's offer of belt-tightening. Instead, they appear to be responding to the strident nationalism and new economic policies of the government. The election campaign has become more bitter, reflecting perhaps the deep concerns Israelis have about their future. The national goals of the past no longer seem so clear-cut. Many Israelis now feel the country lacks direction. There is growing dissatisfaction with the lack of job opportunities, concern over housing shortages. In the past, Israelis accepted compulsory military service. Now they are pointing out its disruptive effects. The average Israeli now wants convincing of the need to make sacrifices. There are still many signs of growth. New flats and offices are under construction in towns all over the country. But under this fabric are signs of social unrest. Ethnic tensions are rising. Social inequalities remain. Last year, inflation reached 130%. Economic pressures have led to rising labor and industrial problems. One dramatic manifestation of the country's ills is the exodus of Israelis. Each month, some 2,000 people are leaving for other lands. Although outside observers see the numbers leaving as normal for a free society, it's a trauma for Israel. It runs counter to the whole reason for the country's creation, as a home and a refuge for Jews. Until recently, the Begin government appeared to be in disarray. It had shown little success in tackling the country's social and economic ills, and Mr. Begin was seen presiding over a disintegrating coalition. His right-wing Likud was dependent on the support of hard-line religious parties. Agreement on government policy was difficult. Ministers were defecting. As the Likud government struggled on, the Labor Party appeared unified and strong. At a party conference last December, the question as to who would lead the party was resolved. The struggle for the Labor Party leadership was heated due to personal animosity between the two candidates. And since a Labor victory in the elections appeared to be a formality, each man expected to be the next prime minister. Former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin sought to wrest back control of the party from Shimon Peres. But Mr. Rabin failed to demonstrate any major differences of policy or ideology between himself and Peres. Many Labor supporters thought the challenge was merely personal rivalry. With national elections looming, they sought a show of strength behind their leader. When the votes were counted, the result was clear-cut. Mr. Peres won an overwhelming mandate. Political commentators interpreted the scale of victory as a sign of displeasure at Mr. Rabin's apparent disloyalty in an election year. With the leadership question resolved, Labor began a low-key campaign. It was felt that the problems of Mr. Begin's government would alone be almost enough to bring him down. At that time, Mr. Begin's Likud appeared dispirited and nearly resigned to defeat. Elements breaking from the Likud coalition added to the growing list of parties contesting the election. One important new party was led by Mr. Begin's former foreign minister, Moshe Dayan. He had formed the State Renewal Party and sought to capture the middle ground, taking votes from both Labor and Likud. Dayan had resigned as foreign minister in October 1979.
In the government means that you have to express and to carry out the policy of the government. And if you cannot do it wholeheartedly, it's your duty to submit your resignation. That's what I did. What I'll find...
Dayan's resignation severely weakened the Begin government. He's one of the most charismatic of Israel's politicians. Hero of past conflicts with the Arabs, he emerged only slightly bruised when Israel was caught unprepared in the 1973 war. At that time, he was a defense minister in the Labor government. Dayan hopes his new party might hold the balance of power between the Likud bloc and the Labor Party. It is one of the stronger of the 24 new parties contesting this election. When the campaign began, the dominant issue was expected to be the economy. Two finance ministers in the Likud government had unsuccessfully tried to cure the economy's basic ills. Israel has long struggled with high inflation, which is blamed on the cost of war and massive defense budgets. Last year under Likud, it climbed to unbelievable levels of over 100%. It was with some measure of desperation that Mr. Begin appointed a new finance minister last January. Yoram Arador had been a deputy minister with a number of portfolios. Now, the 48-year-old lawyer and economist was given his chance. He began by turning previous economic policy on its head. Mr. Arador started by announcing a 10% tax cut on most domestic electrical appliances, color television sets, and small and medium cars. The aim, said the new finance minister, was to reverse the popular expectation that prices will always be rising. The theory was that when Israelis saw that prices could also go down, inflationary pressures would ease. The demand caused by people buying before prices rose even higher would disappear. The immediate effect of the price cuts was to send Israelis rushing to scoop up the bargains. In 2 months, they spent the equivalent of 250 million American dollars. Opponents say Arador is blatantly squandering Israel's scarce foreign currency reserves. They charge that it's a desperate end-of-season sale to buy votes before the June 30th elections. The tax cut was only one part of the Eredor package. There's also a super savings scheme. If you agree to leave your money in the bank for 2 years, its value is immediately increased by 1/4. Interest is at 7%, and the whole transaction is linked to the cost of living index. So the spending spree has been matched by a rush to save. Instead of condemning hyper-consumerism, Eredor is indulging it. Foreign consumer goods are pouring into Israel's docks and airports. It's a complete contrast to former policies. Previous finance ministers had followed the conventional pattern of trying to check rising prices by curbing private expenditure. Mr. Eredor's tax reforms have given people more money to spend. Most Israelis are now paying less tax. Property tax is to be abolished on built-up real estate, and inheritance tax is to be done away with. It's estimated that most Israelis have 20% more money to spend. Traders are enjoying a boom. The new economics have yielded some short-term benefits. The government is printing less money. The rate of inflation has briefly slowed. But most economic observers expect prices to rise again after the elections, and the long-term effects of these policies are unclear. For the moment, though, Israelis appear to be enjoying the new economics. There's a widespread belief that Eredor's measures should at least be given a trial, especially after the old rules had done so little to cure the country's ills. If Eredor's approach is wrong, the short-term benefits are very tempting. And he might just be right.
To domestic matters for a moment. The economy seems to be one of the major issues on which this election will be fought. And the finance minister at the moment...
The old approaches seem typified in the Labour Party's economic plans. The opposition has been caught wrong-footed by the Likud. Shimon Peres is left condemning Eredor's measures as pure election bribery.
Well, I think it's an economic policy for 3 months up to the elections. I think that Mr. Eredor did not solve the problems of the Israeli economy, but worsened them. It can work for a short while. I mean, you can distribute money, you can add to the subsidies for a rather brief period, say until the end of the elections. But afterwards, they're going to face very, very serious problems. So I oppose it and I criticize it, and I'm telling it to the people.
On foreign policy issues, Mr. Begin also appears to have outmaneuvered the Labour opposition. Over recent weeks, he has adopted a more combative stance. In Lebanon, Israeli aircraft have attacked Syrian helicopters. When the Syrians installed guided missiles, a new Mideast crisis developed as the Israeli Prime Minister insisted that the missiles would have to be removed. As the Lebanese crisis continues to boil, an American envoy, Philip Habib, seeks to defuse the situation. War could still disrupt the election campaign. Mr. Begin had another dramatic foreign policy card. On June 7th, Israeli aircraft destroyed a nuclear power plant deep inside Iraq. Labor criticized the pre-election timing, but most Israelis applauded the daring elimination of a possible future threat. Under Begin, the Palestinian question remains unresolved. The curfew in the Arab city of Hebron is a clear example of the continuing tension. After the Camp David peace agreement with Egypt, Mr. Begin is preparing for a complete withdrawal from the Sinai. But on the west bank of the Jordan River and in the Golan Heights, Mr. Begin is extremely reluctant to give back sovereignty. The Likud government has funded and supported Israeli settlements in these occupied territories. This approach is popular with many Israelis. In Hebron itself, the army provides a guard to protect more than 100 militant Jewish settlers living there. The Likud government's agriculture minister, Ariel Sharon, has been an outspoken spokesman for West Bank settlement. The Labour Party is opposed to further West Bank settlement. but it will not dismantle all existing settlements. Shimon Peres proposes negotiation with the Jordanians and West Bank Arab leaders on the future of the territory. But the future of such talks looks very bleak at the moment. On the question of Syrian missiles in the Lebanon, the Labor Party too seeks their removal. But unlike the Likud, Labor would not guarantee military assistance to the Lebanese Christians against Syrian air attacks. The Labor Party was in a dilemma over the Begin government's attack on the Iraqi nuclear reactor. In the end, Mr. Peres merely objected to the attack's pre-election timing. So with Begin clearly seen as a hardline nationalist, how different would Shimon Peres be in office? Would there be a great contrast in style and policies between the two men and the two parties?
Well, I believe that we have to consider people, not only land. We have to consider the social points of view, not just the national points of view. We are a different party. It's not a matter of personalities only. These are two cultures and two concepts colliding before the elections.
You mentioned that you had to consider people and not only land. What basically are the issues involved in Judea and Samaria, the Labour viewpoint and the Likud viewpoint?
The real issue, the ideological one, is should Israel incorporate 1.3 million Arabs against their own wish? Labour says that this will be a real and a deep historic error. We shall turn over a country which is basically Jewish, its concept, which is democratic by its making, into a binational state, which in fact will become a binational tragedy. We are very much taken by the example of Lebanon, or if you want, Northern Ireland. We wouldn't like to introduce in the midst of our beings, or in the future of our country, the elements of such a permanent clash. And for that reason, we should be very careful not to incorporate such a large party of Arabs who do not want to be incorporated in Israel, and short of what is really needed for the country, namely defensible borders, we are going to keep the true nature of Israel as a permanent feature.
In what kind of a framework do you envisage this being accomplished? With whom would you negotiate these defensible borders at this point? How does it look to you?
That's a secondary question. I mean, it can be in Gaza with the participation of the people who reside in Gaza, maybe with the support of Egypt. On the Judea and Samaria with the people who reside there, or with the Jordanians, or a combination of the two of them, whoever will be ready. We shall insist on defensible borders, as I have said. You cannot defend Israel but from the Jordan River. You must keep Jerusalem united, yet you should be careful not to incorporate, as I have said, the residents who reside there against their wish in Israel.
Are you happy with the way that the peace process has developed since the initial stages in Washington?
Well, to go on it historically is not my job. I believe there were made some mistakes on the road to peace. But the main concern today is not what did happen until now, but what's going to happen from now on. Because we have reached the formal niveau of those relationships. Now we have to make it into a reality. And believe me, to translate a treaty in a new reality is a very great challenge, probably the most important one. And I believe it is possible, but it's still a point or a subject which awaits its realization.
Neither the new economic policies nor Mr. Begin's tone in foreign policy fully account for his turnaround in the polls. Another factor is the Prime Minister's success in rallying the Sephardic, or non-European, Jews. These groups have grown increasingly restive at what they see as their second-class status in Israeli society. Mr. Begin has skillfully tapped the Sephardic consciousness. The man at the top of his electoral list, for example, is Housing Minister David Levy, a well-known Sephardic. Housing is a prime area of need. These new flats in East Jerusalem will be allocated to lower-income Jewish families, the kind of people most likely to vote for the Likud. Jerusalem's Kadamon district is one of the inhospitable development areas at the center of Sephardic grievances. The social divisions in Israel have been growing more apparent over the past 7 years, since the last unifying war. Charges were made against this man, ABU-HATZEIRA, the Minister of Religious Affairs in the Likud coalition. He was accused of corruptly managing the funds of his ministry. Mr. ABU-HATZEIRA is a member of an influential Moroccan Jewish family. He suggests that the European Jewish press, police, and state prosecutor's office had joined forces against him. Although acquitted, Mr. ABU-HATZEIRA has split his National Religious Party, the Likud's main coalition partner. He has long hinted that he was being victimized as an Oriental by the European establishment of the National Religious Party. Now he has decided to form his own ethnic-based party called Tami. Mr. ABU-HATZEIRA has already wooed a former Labor Party agriculture minister into his new grouping. It's believed the Likud will be less hurt by the fledgling Tami party. Opinion polls suggest that Tami could win 5 or 6 seats. After the election, if Mr. Begin is in a position to construct another coalition, Tami could be a handy building block. As well as having a wider ethnic appeal than Labor, Likud also attracts the religious hardliners. These Orthodox Jews are trying to close a Jerusalem road because they object to the use of motor cars on the Jewish Sabbath. Religious extremists like these have often formed the basis of militant settlement groups. They, and Mr. Begin, view the West Bank as part of biblical Israel. The attitudes of Jews like these appear to be gaining favor with general Israeli opinion. Polls over the past year have traced a distinct hardening of attitudes on many issues, including West Bank settlements, getting tough with the Syrians, and aiding the Lebanese Christians. This opinion swing coincides with Mr. Begin's tougher line. Labor's publicity presses have not dented the Prime Minister's appeal. With the increasingly bitter campaign going against them, the Labor Party is trying a new approach, saying that Mr. Begin's current stance is a threat to peace. By contrast, Labor depicts its own leadership as sober, responsible, and with all the experience needed to find some new solutions to the problems that are now besetting Israel. Under Israel's eccentric election laws, TV news programs are banned from showing any candidate, even the Prime Minister, for a month before polling day. So now it's the battle of the commercials. The Likud advertisements stress nationalism. They reinforce Mr. Begin's foreign policy actions of recent weeks. Labor's campaign slogan is the Hebrew word emet, truth. Their campaign stresses that they are the trusted and experienced party of power. Leadership style is contrasted as the media campaign reaches its final days. Already there are signs that Labor's campaign has slowed the Likud's surge. The result could be close, with some long and complicated bargaining to construct a new ruling coalition. What Israelis have to decide is, do they want the new slant that Labor might bring, or are they happy to continue with the uncompromising style of leadership that Mr. Begin has given them over the last 4 years?